Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on our channel. I'm Gustavo Balmaceda, and today we're going to dive into a fascinating yet complex topic that's shaping the economic debate in South America: the impact of trade agreements on national sovereignty, with a special focus on the experiences of Chile and Peru. This analysis promises to be one of the most comprehensive we've done so far, so get comfortable. The transformation of Chile and Peru into benchmarks of economic openness didn't happen overnight. This process began in the 1980s and 1990s, when both countries initiated a series of structural reforms that would fundamentally change their economies. What began as a risky bet eventually became a model that many countries in the region are now watching with great interest. The implementation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, known as TPP-11, represents the latest chapter in this story, but also the one that has generated the most controversy. This agreement not only covers traditional trade aspects, but also delves into areas like intellectual property, environmental regulation, and dispute resolution mechanisms, issues that directly touch on the core of national sovereignty. Let's start by analyzing the impressive trade network that these countries have woven. Chile has achieved something extraordinary with its 31 trade agreements covering over 65 countries, giving it preferential access to markets that represent 88% of the world's GDP. To put it into perspective, this means that Chile can trade under preferential conditions with economies that account for almost 9 out of every $10 of global production. Peru, for its part, has followed an equally ambitious strategy. Its 21 trade agreements have opened the doors to over 95% of its exports. This fact is particularly relevant when we consider that, just 30 years ago, Peru was considered a country relatively closed to international trade. The numbers from 2023. We'll be working with more updated statistics later, but let's get back to the point. The numbers from 2023 were revealing. International trade accounted for 57.8% of Chile's GDP and 49.6% of Peru's GDP. To put these figures into context, the regional average for Latin America is only 44%. This means that both countries have achieved significantly greater trade integration than their regional neighbors. This means that both countries have achieved significantly greater trade integration than their regional neighbors. But here, a question arises. What does this mean in practice? This means that more than half of Chile's economic activity, and almost half in Peru, is directly linked to international trade. Since the implementation of TPP-11 in 2018, we've seen significant changes in trade patterns. Chilean exports to member countries increased by 12%. But what's most interesting is the composition of this growth. Lithium, for example, has emerged as a crucial strategic product, especially considering its importance in the global energy transition. Copper, the traditional pillar of Chilean exports, has found new markets with preferential conditions. The Peruvian case is particularly notable in the agro-industrial sector, with an annual growth of 10.5%. This number hides a deep transformation of the Peruvian agricultural sector. Grapes, blueberries, and avocados have conquered traditionally hard-to-penetrate Asian markets. Preferential access to markets like Japan and Vietnam, has been crucial for this expansion, allowing Peruvian producers to compete on equal footing with other global exporters. The Investor State Dispute Settlement System, known by its acronym ISDS, has become one of the most controversial aspects of trade agreements. Chile faced 8 ISDS cases, but the case from 2021 is a $354 million suit from a Canadian mining company over environmental policies. It questions, how can countries enforce environmental regulations without costly suits? Peru faces a tougher situation, facing 15 ISDS claims totaling $1.9 billion. This case raises a fundamental question. To what extent can countries implement environmental regulations without facing costly international lawsuits? Peru faces an even more challenging situation, with 15 ISDS claims totaling a staggering $1.9 billion. These claims, mainly related to changes in mining and tax regulations, represent about 1% of Peru's GDP. The magnitude of these figures can significantly influence public policy decisions. In Chile, 27% of mining water impacts protected or indigenous areas. This statistic highlights a conflict between trade and local rights. In Chile, the data is alarming. 27% of the water used in mining affects protected areas or indigenous communities. This isn't just a statistic, it represents a direct conflict between international trade commitments and the rights of local communities. In Peru, the situation is equally concerning, with 6 out of 10 active social conflicts linked to extractive activities in indigenous territories. These conflicts aren't just local disputes, they reflect a fundamental tension between the economic development model promoted by trade agreements and the ancestral rights of indigenous communities. The intellectual property provisions of the TPP-11 have raised significant concerns in the health sector. In Chile, the analysis from the Association of Independent Pharmacists projects an increase of up to 30% in the cost of medications due to rejections in the entry of generic drugs. This increase isn't just a simple price adjustment, it represents a direct challenge to access to health as a fundamental right. In Peru, where 12% of the population lives in extreme poverty, the potential impact is even more severe. The experience of other countries that have implemented similar intellectual property protections shows that the most affected are invariably the most vulnerable sectors of the population. TPP tests strategies. Chile rethinks lithium plan, key for transition, control resources, meet commitments. Chile has been forced to reconsider its plan to nationalize lithium, a strategic mineral for the global energy transition. This situation raises a fundamental dilemma. How can countries maintain control over their strategic resources while fulfilling their international commitments? The example of New Zealand in the TPP-11 offers valuable lessons. This country managed to negotiate specific sovereign exceptions, particularly regarding environmental and public health issues. Chile and Peru could take this path, seeking to renegotiate key aspects of their trade agreements to protect strategic sectors. The Norwegian model of compulsory public consultations in the ratification of trade agreements also deserves special attention. This approach not only enhances the democratic legitimacy of agreements, but also helps to identify and address specific concerns of different sectors of society prior to ratification. Now, to wrap things up, Strengthening national legal frameworks is obviously crucial. This means developing legal certainty legislation that clearly establishes the limits of international court jurisdiction, that protects strategic sectors like water and biodiversity, that guarantees the rights of indigenous communities, and that ensures access to essential medications. Trade agreements have undoubtedly been a driver of economic growth for Chile and Peru. But the cost in terms of national sovereignty requires careful assessment. The challenge for the future isn't to reject trade integration, but to find a model that better balances economic benefits with the protection of national interests and the well-being of communities. And that's it for the analysis of this video. If you found this content interesting and useful, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss our upcoming analyses on these topics. What do you think? Do you think trade agreements are limiting our sovereignty, or are they an opportunity for sustainable development? Please leave us your opinion in the comments, because your perspective is always very valuable for enriching this debate. I also invite you to share this video with your friends who are interested in geopolitical topics. Together, we can build a more informed community on these topics that are crucial for our future. See you in the next video. A hug to the whole community. And here's to a happy 2025.